Love it.
I'm going to start the recording and I'm going to spotlight you. For the convenience of my editing, I'm going to turn off my video while introducing you. Good afternoon, my Jewish learning learners. Let's get ready to Talmud with one of your favorite Daf Yomi teachers, Dr. Sarah Ronis, who returns this year to teach about demons in the Talmud. Please feel free to share where you're coming in from in the chat. And Dr. Ronis, let's get spooky.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for taking an hour to come and learn some Talmud. There are a lot of folks in the room, so please, if as we're going, we're going to be looking at some really complicated texts. If especially if something about one of the texts is confusing, where you're having trouble sort of figuring out what's going on, please drop a question in the chat. I'm going to ask my Jewish Learning to help us with moderation, just because there are a lot of you and I might be missing folks. But hello from a shockingly chilly San Antonio, Texas this morning. Yes, okay. Fantastic. So let me share a PowerPoint with you. Okay. Wonderful. So, almost everybody in the late antique world believed in demons. Modern American culture thinks of demons as evil, as malevolent, and these evil beings attack human beings by entering into the human body and taking over. Think of films here like The Exorcist, Evil Dead, Amityville Horror, The Babadook, Hereditary, and I could keep going, but I ran out of room on the slide. But while I think for many of us, we think of demons as evil body snatchers, not everybody in the ancient world thought of demons that way. In fact, a lot of folks in the ancient world really didn't think of demons that way. So in my book, which I think I put on the slide, yes, in my book, I examined how the Babylonian rabbis and how they thought about demons. And I asked how this one specific late antique religious group imagined demons in conversation with and in contrast to more popular late antique discourses, right? We all know that Jews are in conversation with the other religious cultures around us. Sometimes those conversations can be constructive, exciting, mutually affirming. Sometimes those conversations can be more fraught and challenging. And when I say that the rabbis are one late antique religious group in conversation with others, I want you to have all of that complexity in mind. So first, I want to start with some background, because before we can talk about how the rabbis think about demons, we have to define both of those terms. So let's start with demons, and then we'll move to rabbis. So when we think of the word demon, the modern English word demon is most often used today to mean an evil spirit. And it's derived from the Greek word daimon, which is a fancy word which, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, means God, goddess, divine power, deity, destiny, fate, good or evil genius of a family or person. Right, like I tell my students often will start a college paper with the Oxford English Dictionary defines, and I have, in honor of them, done that too. In classical Latin, the term develops as sort of an indwelling spirit or genius. Here, thinking sort of the creative spark or muse that guides a person. It's only in post-classical Latin and the early Christian fathers that the term daemon comes to mean exclusively an evil spirit, a false god, or an idol. And that shift, as many people have noted, marks the rejection and the demonization of non-Christian gods as part of wider religious changes, right? So here, the beings I worship are gods, the beings you worship are actually evil demons. demons, right? That's the kind of move that's getting made there. And so the linguistic shift from daimon to demon highlights the ways that defining and naming what I would call intermediary beings in late antiquity is deeply tied to ideological claims about what right religious belief looks like. Great question, Laura. By early Christian fathers here, I'm thinking 4th, 5th centuries CE. Yeah. The rabbis, and just for context, I'm going to tell you, just for context, it's kind of hard because there are so many folks in the room for me to keep an eye on the chat. So Mira, if you see sort of explanatory questions as we go, could you just interrupt me, unmute, let me know? I want to make sure we aren't missing the key foundation questions here.
Absolutely. So there is actually a question about the timeline of early Christianity. What century are we talking about when we say early Christian fathers?
Okay, wonderful. So we're talking about the 4th or 5th centuries. So the earliest phrases of daimon would be thinking like 6th, 5th centuries BCE, and now we've moved almost 1,000 years later, right? So these linguistic shifts don't happen quickly. They happen very slowly, but I think we see quite a bit about how that sort of works here. Now, to shift to the rabbis, because that's who we're most excited about today, the rabbis of the Talmud use a combination of 3 terms here that I'm going to translate all as demons. And I put those up here. It's ruchot, mazikin, and shedim. And the Hebrew and Aramaic term sheda is usually translated into English as demon, but it actually comes from the Akkadian shedu, which refers to a positive protective male deity. Now, before you say to me, okay, well then how come we're translating them as demons? The rabbis were not the only people speaking a dialect of Aramaic. Other speakers of Eastern Aramaic dialects in this period, and here we're thinking from the 2nd century through the 6th centuries CE. So Syriac Christians and Mandeans also used the words ruchot, mazikin, and shedim to refer to, in their context, genuinely always evil demons. And Pahlavi, which is another language spoken in the region at the time, uses the same term, shedu, and parallels it to the word div, from which the English word devil is derived. Okay, so for Syriac Christians, Mandeans, Zoroastrians, the beings who we call a shade are unequivocally evil. They are just bad from start to finish. And when we translate from Syriac, Mandean, or Pahlavi, we translate uncomplicatedly as demons. But today, I'm going to translate ruchot, shedim, and mazikin as demons in our conversation. But I want to note that I'm doing that because those words were when we look at other languages that other groups at the time who use these words, it makes sense to call them demons. But I think we want to remind ourselves as we go in that the word demon itself embraces complexity, leaving space for difference in how these beings are understood within different cultural contexts and how different communities in conversation with each other might use the same word and say, oh, well, you've completely gotten that word wrong, right? As part of broader debates and conversations. So that's the word demon. So to sum up, what are demons? Across these cultures, demons are beings who are more powerful than humans. So they're either gods in some of the earliest texts, or they are somewhere between gods and humans on the power scale. And different cultures at this time see them as good, bad, or ugly. But to all of these groups, demons are real. They are not metaphors for diseases. They are not metaphors for sin. They are seen as real things out in the world that affect humankind. And today, I am less interested in debating whether or not they actually are real, and more interested in thinking about, okay, well, if you believe demons are real, then how do they fit? Right? Which is what the rabbis are doing. I wasn't there, but I think if we take seriously that the rabbis and everybody else in late antiquity believes the demons are real, that lets us ask, okay, well, so what does that actually mean to them? And that's what we're really going to talk about today. Now, of course, I said we had to define our terms. So we've now defined a demon. Let's jump into the rabbis. Today's talk is about demons in the Talmud, which means we have to understand the people who produced it. And those are the rabbis who lived at the time in Sasanian Babylonia. So if you're looking at the map, you can see that the Sasanian Empire is the giant coral empire in the middle. And when we say the rabbis at this time period, we don't mean rabbis like synagogue rabbis. We mean rabbis as a group that is a scholastic elite, which is a fancy way of saying they are knowledge transmitters and producers. They are the inheritors of biblical and Second Temple Jewish traditions, and they wrote their own work of interpretation, of legal discussion, stories, and that's the Babylonian Talmud. Now, the rabbis in the Sasanian Empire live, if you can see my cursor, right here in this little spot called Babylonia. Can you see my cursor on a Zoom? I don't actually know.
Yes.
Okay, amazing, thank you. And this is a region, the Sasanian Empire is ruled by Zoroastrians, and the region that the rabbis live, which is another religion at the time, still exists. I mean, it still exists today. And they live in a region which has Zoroastrians, it has different kinds of Christians, it has rabbinic Jews and other Jews, it has followers of other kinds of religions at the same time. So I think we really want to see this as a rich and cosmopolitan place. I think, there's this sort of myth, well, like back in the day, people didn't have to deal with diversity. They did. They absolutely did. And the stakes were very, very high. So I think that's very, very true. Okay, so hopefully, what we'll see today is that, like most people in late antiquity, the rabbis who produced the Talmud believed in the powerful presence of demons. But I think we're also going to see that as part of their conversation with their world, they looked at some of the other ways that people saw demons around them and said, no, you got that wrong. So now that we've both understood demons and rabbis, in today's talk, we're going to explore how those two interact. And I want to take you through this rabbinic exploration of the demonic in 3 steps. First, I want to show you how the rabbis integrate demons into the world of rabbinic law. How if you see the world through the lens of rabbinic law, you are going to see demons through that lens as well if they're part of the world. In integrating demons into the rabbinic law, then, the second thing that we're going to see is that the rabbis reinterpret the very nature of what it means to be a demon at all. And then finally, because I started with exorcisms and I think they're fun, we'll end with a discussion of the only Talmudic description of an exorcism, as you might think of it. And as we're going to see, and that's your incentive to stay for the next 45 minutes, it's an amazingly strange exorcism that sheds really important light on how the rabbis think about what it means to be human, how they think it means to be a rabbi, and what they think it means to be in relationship with the other kinds of people who live in the Sasanian Empire. Okay. One more thing. Today, for my Jewish learning, we're talking about demons in the Talmud and in ancient Judaism. But I cannot stress enough that demons are not only something that Jews believe in. Associating demons and Jews exclusively is a common modern anti-Semitic trope, and it's one that is toxic. It's wrong, and it causes real harm to real people in the world. It's also just historically inaccurate. I teach at a Catholic university, and the Catholic Church today still charges every diocese with creating a procedure for exorcism. And similar procedures are found across other religious traditions. And I know in a world of rising anti-Semitism, I know that we are always concerned and should be concerned about feeding into toxic tropes. But I'm also a really big believer that we don't let anti-Semites define the scope of what we can talk about and what Judaism is to various individuals and communities, both historically and today. So I want to sort of name that that is a reality, it is a false reality, and that I am rejecting it as part of this conversation. All right, so let's jump into some fun Talmud texts. Now, I know that my Jewish learning scheduled this class for spooky season, but for the rabbis, demons come up most often in connection with a very different holiday season, and that is Passover. So let's see how. The 10th chapter of Tractate Psachim, which is the tractate of the Talmud that talks about Passover, deals with the laws of the ritual meal on the first night of Passover, which we call the Passover Seder. Now, a key component of the Passover Seder, as many of us have experienced for ourselves, is drinking 4 cups of wine. And the rabbis of the Talmud are very detail-oriented. So when they say that you have to drink 4 cups of wine on the first night of Passover, we should expect a lot of follow-up questions. Things, like what kind of wine? How big a glass? Right, how big does the glass have to be? Do you have to drink the whole glass? How quickly do you have to drink each glass? Those are the kinds of questions we might expect the rabbis to ask when talking about drinking 4 cups of wine on Passover. And I want to be extremely clear, they do. They ask those questions eventually. But the very first thing that they ask is not any of that at all. Instead, the very first thing that the rabbis ask is, so I'm going to just read from the slide here. The earliest tradition, called the Mishnah, says one should have no fewer than 4 cups of wine. The next Mishnah, the rabbis then follow up and say, whoa, how could our rabbis institute something that would ultimately lead to danger, right? Drinking 4 cups of wine is profoundly dangerous. How could the rabbis have required us to do that? Okay, what's the danger? Well, as we all know, apparently, for surely it was taught in an earlier tradition. One should not eat in even numbers, or drink in even numbers, nor wipe himself in even numbers, nor fulfill his sexual needs in even numbers. Right? As we all know, apparently, doing things an even number of times is profoundly dangerous. And so you can't drink 4 cups of wine because the number 4 is an even number. Now, why is the number 4 a particularly dangerous number? Great question. And from their answers to the problem, I think we're going to see the solution, right? We're going to see the rationale in the answer. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, it is a night that is guarded. Don't worry, you're okay on the first night of Passover because it is a night that is guarded. Guarded. It is a night that is guarded from the demons. Okay, that's Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's answer. Now, Rav Nachman's answer suggests that the danger of drinking 4 cups of wine is something having to do with demons. Something about doing things an even number of times, eating, drinking, wiping oneself after the restroom, fulfilling one's sexual needs an even number of times, is in some way offensive or provoking to demons. And watch out if you provoke a demon, right? Now, when Rav Nachman says that demons will attack you if you drink 4 cups of wine on an average night of the year, he means that literally. But don't worry, because apparently on the first night of Passover, God's self is going to override demonic dangers and watches over the wine drinkers. So that's what's happening on this page, right? From his answer, don't worry, God watches out from the demons on this night. You get a sense the problem the other nights of the year is going to be demons. But that's not the only rabbinic solution offered. So I'm going to just sort of tell you some of the other ones because they're very charming to me. Rava, another rabbi, says, well, it's not really 4 cups. It's because the third cup of wine that you say after grace after meal counts as its own. So it's not 4, it's 3 plus 1. Don't worry, those are both odd numbers. And then Ravina says, and I'll quote here, Ravina said, each cup is a separate commandment, and thus they do not combine to create a total number that is either odd or even. right? Ravina basically says, no, it's not 4 cups. It's actually 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 cups. And those are all odd numbers. Nothing to look at here, folks. Now, okay, let's unpack what all three of those statements, right? The God's
I
watching.
think that I'm so sorry to interrupt. I think this, did you change the slide?
No,
We're on the same slide. Okay, sorry.
we're on the same
Had a
slide.
couple questions about whether we were on a different side. Gotcha.
We are not on a different slide. I did not bring you the second half because it's part of a much longer conversation. I'm happy to send you those afterwards. And actually, Mira, if you would save the chat and send it to me afterwards, I can take a look. And if there are other things that come up that aren't quite related, that I'm happy to respond as well.
Totally happy to. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes, great question. I'm glad you're paying attention, everyone. So let's unpack what's actually happening here, right? According to all three positions, it's okay to drink 4 cups of wine on the first night of Passover because even though it's dangerous all the other times, right? Nobody says, nah, 4 cups isn't dangerous. They all say, yeah, of course it's dangerous, but there's something about these 4 cups that's different. Which means rabbinic reasoning can neutralize these demonic dangers. And more than that, apparently, demons respect the rabbinic calendar. They know when it's Passover. They keep up with complicated rabbinic math because between you and me, 3 plus 1 is 4. And if I just tell you it's not 4, you're not going to believe me. But the fact that if Rava says, oh, it's not 4, it's 3 plus 1, and the demons are like, oh, yeah, obviously, that tells us something about how they're thinking about rabbinic math. They accept the rabbinic insistence that the number 4 is really made up of odd numbers, even if logically, right? Again, that math, I don't know. Now, why are even numbers provocative to demons? The text doesn't tell us. And we don't have evidence for this specific belief from other nearby cultures at the time. The idea that that even numbers are particularly provocative to demons isn't found in other cultures from this time and place. But I do want to note that it's worth noting that the question has nothing to do with getting drunk. One possible solution to the problem might actually be drinking a 5th cup of wine, which is an odd number, though on behalf of your liver, I don't recommend it. Okay. So ultimately, what I want us to take away from this first text is that demons are invested in and part of rabbinic teaching. They seem to know what the rabbis are doing. And as long as you follow the correct teachings, they won't harm you, right? So as long as you're drinking 3 or 5 any night of the year, or 1 or 0, you're good. But demons don't just respect rabbinic math. They also respect the rabbis. So I want to show you a remarkable text in Tractate Chulin, which has a story that shows you just how much demons respect the rabbis. Okay, so I'm going to read the story and then I want to ask you, what do you notice? What jumps out at you? And we'll sort of monitor the chat for some answers. Certain porters were once carrying a barrel of wine. Wanting to rest, they placed the barrel under a wine spout. The barrel burst. They went before Mar Barav Ashi. He banned the demon, and ban there is a word for excommunicate. The demon came before Mar Barav Ashi and said to him, what should I have done to those men? For they placed the barrel on my ear. He said to him, even so, in a place where people are commonplace, you did not have the right. You acted improperly. Now go and pay for the barrel of wine. The demon said to him, I do not have the money. Set a date on which I should pay. Right? So like, you know, give me some time to collect the money and then I'll bring the money to pay them for the barrel. He set a date, but the demon did not come on that day. When he came at a later date, Mar Barav Ashi said to him, why did you not come on time? The demon said to him, we have no right to take anything that is tied, sealed up, collected, or counted. So we can only take things that are in a state of ownerlessness, which means it took me longer to collect the money. Okay. Wonderful. So, what are their what jumps out at you from this text? Let's just start there. What jumps out at you from this text? And I'd be happy, I'm seeing a lot of folks ask about the slides. I'd be happy to share these afterwards, not a problem at all. Not seeing. Okay, so Gabri says, I'm seeing a lot of very interesting things. Okay, so let me just see one. I saw Gabri and then it got so, and then there's so many other folks. So I apologize. I'm seeing lots of ideas about how we've got a sense that it's really matter of fact that demons are around. It seems to be that the demon is clearly following rabbinic law, trying to follow the rabbi's laws, listen to the rabbis, expected to live under a certain code of laws. Absolutely. I think you guys are noting the particular elements of this text that are so interesting, right? And I want to be really clear. This demon is not looking for humans to attack. He's sitting quietly, right? He's so quiet that he couldn't even be heard, minding his own business, apparently invisible, because the porters put a barrel on his ear and then he reacts with violence. And to be fair, if somebody put a huge barrel of wine on my ear, I would also be, let's go with less than happy. Now, but even then, the demon displaces the violence. He doesn't attack the porters. He attacks the barrel itself. Now, Mar Barav Akshi excommunicates the unnamed demon, an act that the demon resists. Now, I think that tells us something as well. You can only excommunicate people who are a part of your community. And so even though the demon was invisible before, right? Obviously, because if they had seen him, they wouldn't have put the barrel there. He literally appears before the court of Mar Barav Akshi to explain himself, right? And he says, listen, sorry, man, but you should have been more careful in a public space, and he's financially liable. According to the logic of the narrative, then, the demon is a law-abiding citizen with all the rights and responsibilities that identity entails. And when he isn't able to follow the court's ruling, he explains that it's due to his own respect for rabbinic limitations in how and when demons can collect from humankind, right? The demon is a member of the rabbinic community. You can't expel from your community someone who was never in it to begin with. And that's not true just of Mar Barav Akshi's own perception, because the demon's response, rushing to the court to defend himself, suggests that this presumption of membership is mutual and valued by the demon too. So, as we've already begun to see, including demons in the rabbinic legal world changes the very nature of what it means to be a demon for these rabbis, right? Because we've seen demons can be dangerous, harmful, maybe even deadly, but they can also be members of the community in good standing, and perhaps even rabbis themselves. Now, if you think that statement is weird, because it is, let's look at one more text. And if you're used to thinking of demons as angry and malevolent, this one is maybe even more interesting. So a little background. The rabbis of Sasanian Babylonia, which just for context, today is Iraq, they lived in two major rabbinic centers called Sura and Pumbedita. And you can see Sura and Pumbedita on this map right near where my cursor is. According to Google Maps, it would take 37 hours on modern roads to walk between them. But apparently, the rabbis have a tradition that someone taught rabbinic law in both centers on the same Shabbat. And depending on how you calculate it, Shabbat is 24 or 25 hours, so that doesn't quite work. So the rabbis asked, well, who could have done it? Come in here. Who was it that taught 7 legal traditions on a Sabbath morning to Rav Chizda at Sura, and on the same Shabbat evening to Rava at Pumbedita? It is possible that the demon Joseph delivered them. Okay. So they're imagining, right? They're imagining that literally this demon, Joseph, is giving, we might think of like giving Torah lessons, giving talks to rabbis on Shabbat, using demonic powers of getting places in the blink of an eye to get between the major rabbinic centers. Now, right, essentially, Joseph the demon, Yosef Sheda, appears to be a rabbinic teacher who's famous on the lecture circuit. He uses his powers to travel large distances in a short period of time in order to teach at as many schools as possible. Once demons are part of the rabbinic legal system, they have the freedom to excel within it and to succeed according to the rabbi's own metrics of success, Torah knowledge, and rabbinic authority. Now, I've found no parallels to this phenomenon in other contemporaneous cultures. And these examples that we've just looked at, these three examples, just point to some of the utter normalness of demons in the Talmud. Yeah, they could be seen as potential threats to the rabbis and their followers, but they're also imagined in rabbinic legal discourse in ways that include them in and subordinate them to rabbinic law. But demons are not just subordinated to the rabbis. In one fascinating story in Tractate Gittin, the hierarchy is overturned, and the demon actually becomes greater than the ultimate Torah scholar, King Solomon. The central demonic figure in this story is going to be a demon whose name is Ashmedai. And can I maybe let's just get a survey. Have you heard of Ashmedai, and what do folks know about him? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of really wonderful ideas. Some folks have heard of him. Some folks have not heard of him at all. Some folks are asking if he is, or saying that he is the same person as the Latin or Greek Asmodeus. He is. So Ashmedai, and then one person is shouting out Sasha Lamb's wonderful book, When the Angels Left the Old Country, in which Ash serves is a central character. So absolutely amazing. So Ashmedai he first appears in the extra canonical book of Tobit with a Hellenized version of his name, Asmodeus. And this is probably written in the region of Babylonia, so right around here. This demon also appears earlier in Zoroastrian texts as Aishma Deva, which translates to the demon of wrath. But though he has an important life in a variety of texts, we'll see that the rabbinic portrayal of him is uniquely and essentially rabbinic in nature. Now, I'm going to tell you the story. I'm only going to give you pieces of it because it is extremely long, and I would have to make the words on the slides very, very small. So you're getting pieces. You're not missing. There is no secret handout everyone has but you. I'm just going to tell you the stuff that's not on the slide. So in 1 Kings, Solomon builds the temple without using any metal implements in the construction. And the Talmud asks a very practical question, which is, how could you have done that? How can you core stone without metal? The redactors of the Talmud answer the question by telling a story set in a mythical past where King Solomon lived at the same time as the Sanhedrin, the rabbinic high court in Jerusalem. Now, according to the story told, Solomon decides to find the mythical shamir, which is something that will cut through stone, but isn't metal. He asked some demons where he could find one. They said to him, we don't know, but you know who would is Ashmedai. He would definitely know. Okay, they said to him. He said to them, right? So now we're on the slide. Solomon said to the demons, where is Ashmedai? They said to him, he's on such and such a mountain. How will I recognize it? The demons responded, he has dug a well and filled it with water and covered it with a large flint rock and sealed it with his seal. Right, apparently he's very into clean water. Every day he ascends to the heavenly academic session and learns the heavenly Torah lesson, and then descends to the earthly academic session and learns the earthly Torah lesson. And then he inspects his seal and uncovers the well and drinks and covers it and leaves. Okay, let's just stop for a minute at this point in the story and reflect on how Ashmedai is described. He spends his day studying Torah in rabbinic academies, first in heaven, and then presumably with actual rabbis on earth. Okay, what happens next? King Solomon sends a messenger to capture Ashmedai so he can be interrogated to find out where the shamir is. The messenger tricks Ashmedai into getting drunk and takes him hostage. But before he's taken hostage, he quotes numerous biblical verses and shows that he follows the dictates of Jewish law. Over the course of the rest of the story, Ashmedai recognizes God as his only master and shows that he has more insight into human nature, reality, fate, and biblical interpretation than any of the other characters in the story, including King Solomon. Ashmedai ends the tale by tricking King Solomon into releasing him and stealing King Solomon's throne and identity. Right? Solomon says to Ashmedai at some point, "It is written, God is like the Toafot Re'aim." And we explained, like the Toafot, those are the ministering angels. Re'aim, these are the demons. How are you greater than us humans? Ashmedai said to Solomon, "Remove the chain from me and give me your ring, and I will show you my greatness." Solomon removed the chain from him and gave him his ring. Ashmedai swallowed it, placed it in the heavens, and placed one wing in the heavens, the other wing on earth, and hurled Solomon a distance of 400 miles. To quote another somewhat strange creature, pretty obviously, this is a trap. And it's a trap that Solomon falls into. Now, as some folks have already noted in the comments, eventually Ashmedai does lose the throne, his identity is discovered, but the rabbis actually disagree on whether or not Solomon is ever able to take his power and identity back. The book of Tobit depicts Asmodeus as an evil, lustful, jealous demon. The Talmudic portrayal of him is very different. He's a pious student of the Torah as taught in heavenly and rabbinic academies. He's able to cite biblical verses, and he's deeply insightful. The authors of the Talmud have no problem with demons being a part of the halachic system. It's their clever solution to what might be perceived as uncontrollable and monstrous dangers, right? Oh, you could be dangerous? Not if you listen to me. But this narrative also highlights rabbinic anxieties around the integration of the demonic into their legal system. Because if demons, who are more powerful than humans, can be a part of the system, then who's to say that they might not end up actually better than the rabbis themselves? Now, in all of these texts, I had that already. Okay, great. In all of these texts, demons have multiple manifestations. They're both malevolent forces with the power to harm the unwary, rabbinic informants who contribute to and teach the rabbinic legal project. They're radically embodied and real. They're not metaphors, they're not symbols of human failing, and I think I've seen in the chat some really beautiful reflection on what these can teach us about the marginalized, the invisible today. And I think that's all extremely true. But I think for the rabbis, they are also real as demons. And as embodied real beings, demons are controlled, invited, and expelled through the same legal strategies that are used to construct the broader rabbinic community. And if you're a part of the community, you can thrive within it. Okay. As a result, though, right, and here's sort of the extra clever bit, followers of rabbinic law are almost completely protected from demonic harm. Because if the demons follow rabbinic law and you are a human who knows rabbinic law, they'll leave you alone. Or maybe even better, they'll come and study Torah with you or teach you Torah in your community. For the rabbis, what might be understood as a dangerous other actually becomes a part of the self. With all of the new concerns and anxieties that shift creates. So against this backdrop, I want to look at one last text, and I want to return to the topic with which I started this talk, which is exorcism. So Tractate Me'ilah tells an amazing story. An unnamed Roman emperor decrees that Jews are forbidden to keep the Sabbath, to circumcise their sons, and to keep the purity laws. A small group of rabbis journey to Rome to beg the emperor to reconsider his decree. Now, according to this story, the rabbis who embark on this journey live in Roman Palestine. But the story is being told by Babylonian rabbis, and it doesn't exist in the Palestinian rabbinic literature. Roman Palestine is the name of this region at this time. So we should think of this story as a Babylonian rabbinic fable or legend, not necessarily as a historical account. And as the rabbis journey to Rome, they meet the demon Ben Thalamion. And together with Ben Thalamion, they come up with a plan to convince the emperor to annul his decree. Ben Thalamion uses his demonic ability to move large distances in the blink of an eye to run ahead of the rabbis. He enters into the body of the emperor's daughter and refuses to leave. Essentially, he possesses her in a way that Romans see as demonic possession. The rabbis eventually arrive in Rome, and at this point, the emperor is so distraught about his daughter's condition that he promises anyone who can successfully exorcise her can have anything they want from the imperial treasure house. The rabbis literally stage or perform an exorcism, announcing, Ben Thalamion leave, Ben Thalamion leave. He leaves, the emperor's daughter is healed. The rabbis go into the imperial treasure house, take out the emperor's decrees against the Jews, and tear them up. Now, let me say this explicitly. Ben Thalamion is not an evil demon out to cause harm. He's instead an ally of the rabbis, helping the rabbis perpetuate Jewish belief and traditions in the face of a hostile Roman emperor. But this is the only story of demonic possession in the entire Babylonian Talmud. And even here, it's a fake possession, right? I mean, like, this isn't something that the demon would do if it wasn't to help out the rabbis. So why? Now, in part, the rabbis don't think the demon's attacked by entering the body, in part because they don't think demons attack at all if you are on the right track. But I would also say that it also ties rabbinic demonology to rabbinic anthropology. Understandings of the body as possessed or possessible depend on particular cultural constructions of the body and the self. Second Temple Jewish anthropology has that kind of understanding, right? If you have many Second Temple Jews, including those Jews who end up following Jesus and becoming Christians over time, adopt what's usually attributed to Plato, this binary between body and soul. The binary isn't neutral. The soul was the locus of the self. The body was a container or even a prison made of flesh. That is not the rabbi's anthropology. Dr. Alon Goshen-Gottstein suggests that for the rabbis, metaphysically, soul and body form a whole rather than a polarity, right? So they're not two separate things where a being can jump in and displace part of it. If the soul is inextricably integrated with the body, there's no space for a demon to enter. There's no human body for a demon to control because the body's not a separate force, which can be operated remotely. The metaphor that I often use is the metaphor of hijacking. For a car to be hijacked, there has to be a car and there has to be a driver. These two things have to be separate. The hijacker must be able to replace the driver by displacing them from the car's seat. But while you could theoretically hijack, a Mazda 3 in a busy American city, though I obviously don't recommend it, you could never hijack one of the animated cars in the Pixar's movie Cars. What would that even look like? It's only in a Roman world with different understandings of the human body that there's room for a rabbinic demon to stage a demonic possession by playing on the anthropological assumptions of the Roman household. Now, the rabbis clearly know that not everybody in the world shares their beliefs about demons. They're a religious and political minority, both in the Roman world and in the Sasanian world. And they know that majority cultures have different attitudes and beliefs about demons. And though they don't imagine, right, the rabbis don't think demons attack people by entering into their bodies, they do know that people believe that in the Roman West. And in a world where they're at the mercy of a Roman emperor who doesn't understand them at all, they're willing to play along, at least in this story in Tractate Me'ila, to create a safe space for Jewish faith and practice. So let's conclude. And then I think I timed it so we have plenty of time for questions. By integrating demons into the legal world, the rabbis established themselves, the masters of the law, as those most qualified and capable of leading the Jewish people, a Jewish people that includes demons. They do so as part of larger empire-wide discourse, which creates new opportunities for the construction of identity in conversation with and in opposition to other religious, linguistic, and ethnic groups. Let me be super clear about this. The rabbis are not just getting this from the Zoroastrians or from some other group. This isn't something where pure Jewish tradition is affected by outside superstition, right? In the case of Ashmedai, we see how the name shows up in different traditions and texts. But what they actually do with this demon is so profoundly different. You can't say, oh, they're just getting it from somebody. This is Jewish tradition. Demons become a point of shared terminology, as well as an opportunity for what for them would have been authentic Jewish religious differentiation. And this religious differentiation should not surprise us, because where the Zoroastrian rulers of the empire were dualist, they understood demons, right? By dualist here, I mean that they believed in two major divine forces, one good and one evil. And the good one had their own minions, who today we might translate as angels, and the evil one, Ahriman, had his minions, and those today we would translate as demons. The Jewish rabbis of Sasanian Babylonia were forced to integrate the demonic into a worldview in which only one God created both positive and negative forces in the world. Right? It's easy to say, oh, these things can be evil because there's an evil God who promotes evil. It's a lot harder to say there's only one God and somehow there's also evil in the world. So in dealing with demons, the rabbis have three theological options. One, that demons are evil and God created evil in the world on purpose for there to be evil. Two, that God is entirely good and that demons are somehow evil beings outside of divine control. And I want to be clear, the rabbis of the Talmud are not going to suggest that God is either evil or not in control of everything. And that leaves them with option three, that God is good and in control of everything. And so demons must serve a presumably good divine purpose. Or at least, if not entirely good, let's go with not evil. And that's the option that the rabbis of the Talmud choose. Demons are at worst capricious and dangerous when threatened. At best, legal actors in the rabbinic system and perhaps rabbis themselves. And I think what this really leaves us with is the idea that with a little legal ingenuity, sometimes the spookiest creatures out there can become our friends. And that is a lesson we can all take. So we have plenty of time for questions. And Mira, I know you've been keeping an eye on it. So if there are questions that you see that you want us to address, please let me know. Because I'm extremely overwhelmed by the 100 chats I missed.
I am compiling some of them right now, but I'll actually ask, oh my gosh, Rolf, you asked the exact question I was about to. How do demons and jinn compare? Some of what you're saying about Jewish demons, like very parallel to jinn, some of it is a little different. So I'm curious if you know anything about that.
Yes, wonderful question. So in a lot of ways, rabbinic Jews and the Quran align really well on this, and because of monotheistic, because of sort of a commitment to a radical monotheism. And so in the Quran, the jinn are bound by God's laws. They are obedient to God's laws. They also do lots of really wonderful work in supporting other followers of God's laws. And so I think we see both of those things in the text. Now, the Talmud's texts are somewhat earlier than the Quran, which is not just, I'm not arguing one gets it from the other, but I do think that what we see is is that when you believe that there is one God in the world who created everything and is good, you can end up with similar ways of dealing with these problems. And I'm going to do this thing because my publisher would be mad if I didn't. But if you are interested in my book, it is quite expensive because academic publishing is complicated. But there is a promo code for my book at this website. And if you look at that and you're like, that looks really interesting, and I'm also not going to pay that amount of money, I want to encourage you to ask your local library to buy a copy. If enough copies get sold, it goes to paperback, and then it was even then it is much more affordable. So I had to put the promo code, but there you go. And yes, thank you to I don't know who wrote the thing about Fravashi, but I think it's a really important point when we talk about the ancient world, and whether that's true of Jewish traditions, Christian traditions, ancient Zoroastrian traditions, that they all of these religions continue to develop and grow and respond to new forces and experiences in the world. Zoroastrianism is around today. There are Zoroastrians who are doing really interesting work in their own communities. And so please don't take anything I say about either Rabbinic Judaism of the Talmud or Christianity or Zoroastrianism in the ancient world as a sign that that's exactly what things are like today, right? Religions are rich and constantly engaging with the world. Yeah.
Do demons have free will?
Yes. Yes, they do. For the rabbis, they absolutely do. Except that, like all beings, they are following, they follow the rabbis and God. So we do have a couple of stories where, you know, a rabbi tells a demon to do something, and he's like, well, actually, in that case, this is a Lilith, maybe, probably not. Agrat Bat Machat, who says, I would really hurt you for breaking the law, except I've heard God in heaven talk about how amazing you are, and so I just can't. So there is a degree of free will, but also a recognition that, how much free will does anyone have in a world where God is in ultimate control?
These are. Was Zoroastrianism the religion of Babylon during the exile or during the Tana/Amora?
So those two periods are about at least 800-900 years apart. So during the time of the Talmud, the ruling elite is Zoroastrian. The Persian rulers of the region are Zoroastrian. During the time of the Babylonian exile, Zoroastrianism has not made it into this region yet. It's right. Babylonia is Iraq. Zoroastrianism emerges out of what is today Iran, and as people migrate, it shifts, but it hasn't shifted yet. In the time of the Babylonian exile, you have the majority religions are worshiping the Babylonian gods from the old Babylonian pantheon. But again, right, it's not like, okay, new ruler comes in and everybody changes their religious beliefs. So during the time of the Sasanian Empire, you still have lots of people who are worshiping older religious traditions, a variety of kinds. I mean, genuinely, I want us to understand the ways that religious diversity is not new in any way.
Okay, 1 second. Were demons seen as being on Earth before people?
That's a great question. And I would say if we look at the rabbis, and I think this is true of a lot of things, rabbis care less about some of the big theological questions than they do about the, like, how do we actually do stuff today? Like, they spend less time thinking about where people come from and more time about the rules of Shabbat, or, as we're about to discover in Daf Yomi, the ox that gores. So they do have numerous stories of demonic origins. There are sort of three major ways that they tell the story of demonic origins. But they don't always align. They're not interested in figuring out the answer. So one is that demons were part of God's original creation, that God wanted to create demons and so did. The second is that demons are the result of some kind of primordial sin, whether that's a story that we may think of as the fallen angels, or whether that's something else. Maybe something around Noah and the flood, unclear. And then the third story, and this only appears once, and it's the sort of very odd, like maybe animals evolve into demons over generations of years. And they never really moved to resolve that. Anyone who studies Talmud is probably familiar with the fact that the rabbis are very comfortable with multiple answers to questions without pushing towards resolution in ways that I think can be very, very frustrating for modern readers who are like, hey, but what's the answer? Right? Certainly I experienced that with my students.
Finally, there's a good question that's about what is the relationship between Satan in Judaism and demons?
Yes. And the answer is at this point, nothing. Except that they are all created by God. So in the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, the Satan is not what we might think of as sort of an evil Satan figure, as much as an accuser who seems to be doing something right. He works on behalf of God. So that is the Satan. The idea of an evil Satan who is a semi-independent prince of hell shows up in texts that develop after the latest text in Tanakh, and sort of comes to full flourishing in texts that are either part of the Apocrypha, meaning the books that didn't make it into the canon, or in Christian tradition. And so there, I would say, even in the Talmud, demons are not associated with Satan. That idea in Judaism shows up outside of sort of very niche texts in a later period. So, but that's really interesting, right? Because if demons are not connected to Satan, even when they're having discussions of punishments in an afterlife, that tells us something about how the rabbis are thinking about demons. And I think it's a reminder that it's not just a world of, humans and then God. This is an incredibly rich world with all kinds of forces out there, visible or not visible, who people the world, right? So we've got our angels, we've got our demons, we've got our evil eye, and our what was the other word I was going to use, right? Our evil inclination, and a Satan, and maybe we have some satyrs out there, right? I mean, the world that the rabbis imagined was an incredibly rich world where you were in relationship not only with the beings you could see, but a whole world of different kinds of beings that you may or may not be able to see. So I think that's a really wonderful way to end and think about the richness of the world around us, visible and otherwise.
Dr. Ronas, thank you so much for joining us today for this really amazing event. I look forward to including, a link to this presentation in the follow-up. And thank you all so much for joining us for Jewish Learning on Halloween. If you do celebrate it, happy Halloween. You can also find Sarah Ronas doing a lot of stuff with Talmud. So if you enjoyed this, I'd also recommend you sign up for our weekly highlights of Daf Yomi. You may see her sometimes. Dr. Ronas, thank you so much for joining us today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all for coming out. Bye, everyone.